Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. And today we're going to be discussing something that is on everybody's mind right now. And we have some of the highlights that came in through my friends in Washington, D.C. It's called the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, this comes directly from the White House. And so here's what they say. Number one, it has the largest permanent tax cut in 30 years. So the thing is, we're going to check that out. Number two, no tax on tips. That's pretty good. We should all be in favor of that, right? Number three, no tax on overtime. Part of the policy in this bill. Number four, tax relief to Social Security. There's a lot of people in Social Security that need these tax relief. Then number five, mass deportations for illegal immigrants. They're all going to be out of here. Number six, he's going to finish the Trump border wall. It's no longer the border wall, it's the Trump border wall to make sure they don't come in through places like the Gulf of America. Number seven, boost Border Patrol and ICE agents. I guess we need more ICE agents because we have a lot of illegal immigrants in the United States. And this one, remove 1.4 million illegal immigrants from Medicaid. Another interesting thing in the beautiful bill, require able-bodied Americans to work for their benefits. No more free lunch. Got to work for your lunch. I think that'll be interesting. And the last one, the largest deficit reduction in 30 years with 1.6 trillion in savings. We haven't seen such deficit reduction since Bill Clinton. But these are all the talking points from the White House. And Congress, of course, is traditionally silent. But somebody who's not silent on fiscal responsibility is the former Comptroller General of the United States of America. And he's been harping about this for years. And we're going to bring in him now, the Honorable David M. Walker. David, I don't know if you've seen this bill, but these are all the White House talking points I just put up there. And the last one, of course, we're going to make America first. So what are your thoughts? The bill has now advanced past the House. It's going into the Senate. And what are your thoughts about this?
Well, several things. First, as you know, Nick, today is Memorial Day, a day that we honor those who gave their life and made the ultimate sacrifice in order to protect our freedoms and our country. So it's important to acknowledge that right up front. Secondly, you know, the White House wants to call this the big, beautiful bill. It could also be referred to in another alliteration, a big budget buster. You know, let me give you the executive summary as to how I see this, and we can then talk about where do we go from here. You know, the president ran on, you know, trying to right-size government, trying to secure the border, trying to stimulate the economy, to try to hold inflation down, to provide more international stability. And to a great extent, this bill is intellectually consistent with that. It ends up extending or proposing to extend the 2017 tax cuts, which are otherwise scheduled to expire at the end of this calendar year. It proposes, as you mentioned, to also add new tax relief, no tax on tips. I don't know about you, but I may just work for tips from now on out. Secondly, no tax on overtime, although I think there are some restrictions on both of those so that people don't end up trying to game them, as I just mentioned. Tax relief for Social Security. Originally proposed no taxes on Social Security benefits. Now he's proposing, I think, a $4,000. I think it's a deduction rather than a credit for seniors, if you will. My personal view, the right answer to that is you don't tax more than 50% of Social Security because half of it you paid for yourself and you didn't get a tax deduction for it. So it's really double taxation. It also proposes, rather than eliminating the $10,000 a year limit on state and local tax deductions, to raise it to $40,000. If you don't do anything, it ends up giving unlimited deduction. So ironically, that actually saves money rather than cost money to do that. It proposes to spend additional money for national security and for homeland security. And that includes not just border security, but also deporting illegal immigrants with a priority towards those with a criminal record, either here or overseas. In addition to that, it proposes, a range of other things designed to try to save money. For example, to try to get illegal immigrants off of Medicaid, to try to deal with some of the abuses of the Medicaid system by the states, to try to eliminate, situations where people, where states are getting paid twice for the same person because they've lived in different states. So there are just a number of provisions. But the bottom line is this. When you consider what the proposal is as compared to current law, meaning, in other words, if you did nothing, what would the impact be over time versus what this bill proposes? Then it ends up increasing deficits over 10 years, 3.5 trillion plus. I don't know where the talking point comes from saying that they save 1.6 trillion dollars in spending. They must just be talking about the spending and not the bottom line deficit. I've heard, anything from 1.6 to 2. The only thing that matters is the bottom line. And the bottom line is worse, not better. And the real question is that where do we go from here? It goes to the Senate. The Republicans have, a slight majority in the Senate. It's going to be considered as part of budget reconciliation, which means it can't be filibustered. You just need a simple majority in order to pass it. There's at least 3 senators that have said, Republican senators that say that they have a problem with the bill as it's presently constituted. If the vote in the Senate is a tie, then it's up to the vice president to break the tie. And obviously he would vote for the bill. But there's a lot of negotiation that still has to happen. The Senate, ironically doesn't believe there's enough spending reductions, at least some of the Republicans, when in fact, the bill that the Senate sent over to the House, had much less spending reductions than the House bill does. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. They want to try to end up passing the final bill before July 4th. I don't think that will happen. I think they'll be fortunate to be able to pass something before the August recess, which I think would be important. Oh, another controversial aspect of the bill, it proposes to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. In other words, to get it past the midterm elections and sometime past that. But you got to keep in mind, we're running $2 trillion a year deficits. And in addition to that, we've imposed these extraordinary measures. So whenever the debt ceiling is increased, it will go up very, very quickly and dramatically to be able to reflect all the extraordinary measures that they've taken over the last several months, whereby they don't end up investing certain contributions to Social Security and Medicare and civilian and military pensions, and therefore, conserve, the cash, if you will. And as you know, the budget's done on a cash basis rather than accrual basis. And not surprisingly, when you look at the numbers on an accrual basis, they're worse than on a cash basis. Typical for politicians. They want to end up minimizing the negative and maximizing the positive. I guess that's just human nature. So let me just stop at that, Nick, as an opening, and then we can have some interchange, and hopefully we'll get a few people to join us, although it is a holiday.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people that are actually on the other show right now arguing this, which is this apparently this big, beautiful bill. Although we do have Kim Calhoun that's actually has joined us. Might be
as I said, it's a big budget buster.
It's a big budget buster. Well, I mean, this is the problem I have with this, David, is what you're looking at is it was almost like senseless when it came to balancing the budget or even closing or even make an attempt to. In other words, they're working very hard at making sure that they reduce spending. Okay. But nobody's looking at revenue. And there's two sides to this equation. And this is not a revenue group because the revenue has to come from their pockets for the most part, because they're the millionaire and billionaire class, and they don't want to pay for it. So, and what does it hurt? It hurts the American credit and the American people. What is our credit rating right now? Does anyone have us at AAA anymore?
No, all three rating agencies have downgraded the U.S. In
Right.
addition to that, our borrowing costs are going up, not just because of the deficits, but because the rate that we're having to pay to finance our deficits is going up. There are a number of market signals saying that we need to change course. It's more than a little ironic that the president said that he wanted to move towards a balanced budget. This doesn't come anywhere close to that. And in reality, we don't need to balance the budget. But what we do need to do is we need to reduce the debt to GDP to a reasonable, sustainable level over the next 10 years or so. I'm all for pro-growth policies, but you're not going to grow your way out of this problem. You're not just going to cut your way out of this problem. We're going to have more revenues as a percentage of GDP. The problem is primarily a spending problem, but not exclusively a spending problem. And that's just the reality.
Yeah, and there's what I call a revenue problem. In other words, the U.S. government isn't looking to the fact that they need revenues. They can get revenues through user fees, taxes, tariffs, various different forms of ways to get revenue. But last thing you do is do a big giveaway. And then, and even the estate tax, it just really bothers me because the thing is, limits are so high and the net worth of the top 1/10 of 1% or top 1% have 30% of all the assets. Now, I don't think people even realize how strong that is financially. If you have a sector that has 1% owns 30%, and then you get to the top 10%, they own like 90%. Our bottom half in the United States has 2.8%. They're actually down from 3.5%, which means when I'm trying to sell my products and services, Dave, this how it hurts me. I can't sell to half the people that I see because they're broke. In other words, I have to really look hard for the 1%, or at least the top 10% to work with in the United States, because half the Americans can't get a hold of $500. And I don't know when they're going to wake up and realize how broke they are. But
I'm going to ask a question to David here. I mean, how much do you think is that people don't fully understand what the real impact is going to be? Because aside from the big bill, there are some other little things that have been passed, such as each year they're going to be increasing the taxes on minimum wage or wages that are $15,500 or maybe $16,000 and under. And by 2027, because I watched the review committee on this, by 2027, those taxes will be increased by 74%. I do the math on 75. Now, if you look at someone who's earning $15,500 a year, what is the tax on, what is, 74%? It's close to 11,000. And so you're not doing the taxes on their tips, but that might be a return of $5,000. They're going to owe $6,000. They're not going to have enough money to sustain. Nobody on minimum wage does. Overtime is kind of in the same mess. A lot of people are going to go by this, I'm not going to have to pay taxes on overtime, but you're going to be paying through the year. None of them are going to read the bill. None of them are going to read the tax law. And next year, they're going to get screwed because it has a limit. And the limit is 20%. If you earn 20% overtime of what your minimum wage is, then you don't qualify for the no taxes on that. And you will pay more because you have earned more. So nobody's really going to get true value of any of these laws because they don't understand how they work. They haven't done the math to know how much they need to work in order for it to benefit them. It's going to screw, I guarantee you, it will screw 98% of the people.
Well, several
What do you
things.
think?
several things. One, I must admit I have not read the 1,000+ page bill. At some point in time I will, but I haven't.
It's a lot.
Yeah. Secondly, yeah, I'd rather read a book than.
Me too. I had a book on not on vacation, but I had a book.
1,000 pages. Okay. But in any event, but here's the more important point. I guarantee you that an overwhelming majority of members of the House and the Senate haven't read it either.
Right.
And I don't know that they will ever read it. Okay?
They don't.
But let me come back to a point that you made. Look, anybody who's making $15,000 a year under the current tax code should pay zero in income taxes. Zero. Okay. Because the standard deduction was increased dramatically. Okay. They're paying Social insurance taxes, meaning Social Security and Medicare, but they get something for that. Right now, you have over 40% of people who file individual income tax returns that pay zero income tax, over 40%. And you get about 20% of individuals who file individual income tax returns not only pay zero, they get money back because of the earned income tax credit, because of the child care tax credit. So it is true that we have an increasing concentration of wealth among a smaller percentage of Americans. It's true that more and more income is being earned by that smaller portion of the overall population. It's true that we've got to have more revenues as a percentage of GDP to get a comprehensive and sustainable solution to this issue. But the answer is more people need to pay something, and the wealthy need to pay more. Mm-hmm. And we can debate how you do that. My personal view, Nick, you talked about the estate tax. What about the step up in basis? I mean, that's ridiculous.
It's great if you're absolutely. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, it's great if you're rich.
Yeah, but it just
people don't even understand how great that is for wealth transfer. It's stuff up in basis.
It's unbelievable. And when you have a smaller and smaller percentage of the population controlling more and more of the nation's wealth, it makes no sense whatsoever. Okay. And so maybe eventually people will wake up. My personal view is, one of the things we've got to do is we've got to dramatically streamline and simplify the tax code. We need to get rid of and limit a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, to try to keep rates as low as we can. And as I said, bottom line, we need more people paying something and the wealthy paying more. That's the bottom line.
So here's the analysis I read. The bottom fifth of Americans make less than $17K a year. The bottom 40% make less than $51K. Most of these people pay zero in federal income taxes.
Right.
However, the analysis said that the cuts in this big new bill will result in people in the bottom 20% spending $1,000 more on stuff that they're getting, services like Medicare and food stamps. People in the bottom 40% making 17 to 51K a year will spend on average another $700.
Yeah, and part of the issue is what do you compare it to, right? I mean, one of the things the administration is doing is saying, well, look, if you don't extend these tax cuts, then people are going to pay more taxes, right? And it's not just the wealthy, okay? Because keep in mind, by significantly raising the standard deduction, you dropped a lot of people off the tax rolls. I mean, there's no question about that. You also made taxes a lot easier to deal with because you don't have to go through, listing all of your itemized deductions, if you will. You just take the standard, if you will. So look, it all compares. What do you want to benchmark it against? The bottom line is the advocates say it's a big, beautiful bill. The opponents say it's a big budget buster. And the answer is, depends on where you sit.
In England,
David, you mentioned
hold on. No, in England, They do your taxes for you. They send you a statement every year that says, here's how much we think you owe. And if you differ, if you beg to differ, then you can explain why. But it takes less than an hour to do your taxes in Britain.
Well, I'm not familiar with the UK tax code, but I would imagine it's probably along the lines of what I just said, where it's, you don't get a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, and they're minimal. And so therefore you're basically taxing on gross income, or at least adjusted gross income. And so then you can take that kind of approach. But the way our system is right now, that's virtually impossible, which we need to move away from.
Mhm.
John's on here too. John, you
Hey,
got
John.
He's from Canada.
I know.
Hello. Yes.
Hello. How's the tax system in Canada? Is it a pain?
No. I've got an accountant, so
Oh well, then
up until I retired, I was self-employed. So I have an accountant that I pay, and we send everything to him. Do we pay too much? No. I look at Sweden and Norway. A lot of people complain. Some people complain, but I'm pretty happy with the level that I'm paying in my family and what we get for that.
It's all what you compare it to, right? Everything in the world is relative, and
Right.
no question about that. Well, I have a
I prefer. Sorry to cut you off. I prefer our Canadian system to America's.
okay.
Fair enough.
I have a CPA that does my taxes too, but he doesn't get paid, and that CPA is called me.
Oh, you're saving a lot on CPA fees. David, what's the odds of this bill getting through the Senate? I know the House has already approved it, and we know if the Senate approves it, Trump's going to sign it. But what are the odds makers saying in terms of this bill getting approved in its current format by the U.S. Senate? Some senators don't seem to be too happy.
I don't know what the exact odds are right now, but I would say that they are not. There's not much chance that the bill will get through in its present form. There will be modifications, and the question is how extensive a modifications, and how will that end up being received by the House? Because as you know, it only passed by one vote in the House.
All right. So the thing is, it's going to be a nail biter. What do you think about the increase in the deficit of $3.8 trillion? I mean, that's another amount of money you're putting on the credit card, and it's not a small amount of money. What's your thoughts on that?
It's 3.8 trillion over 10 years, which is 380 billion a year. When we're running a deficit of about 2 trillion a year, it's fiscally irresponsible. And I don't hesitate to say that this bill is fiscally irresponsible as compared to current law. There are aspects of it that I think make sense, but we need to be reducing debt to GDP, not increasing debt to GDP. And there are some calculations that have been done where they say that this will actually reduce debt to GDP because they're making very optimistic assumptions about what economic growth will be, if this is passed, and ultimately time will tell. Rick, you got your hand up?
Yeah. So businesses, internet, like we can attract a lot of investment and entrepreneurs from around the world because business people, investors love a stalemated government. A government that can't do anything, can't regulate anything. So you can come in, you can set up shop in New Jersey and pollute the heck out of it, for instance, where maybe you couldn't do that in frickin' Sweden. However, to attract foreign bucks, Trump has to quit with the crazy xenophobia. We were talking on the previous show, Europe, the EU is going to spend $500 million on inviting scientists who are foreign scientists who are nervous about continuing to work in the US. They're saying, come over here, bring us, your discoveries and your knowledge. So, we got to quit with the, trolling the brown people of the world.
Well, we also have to resolve our tariff situation. As you know, the president just agreed to pause any increase in tariffs beyond the current tariffs with the EU until July 9th. He was proposing to increase tariffs for all EU products and services to 50% effective the beginning of June. I've said all along that I think the two most difficult tariff discussions that we're going to have are going to be with the EU and with China. And we need to get past that as soon as possible.
I looked up one thing, like we're all white people here. And a lot of Trump's agenda is to or at least a lot of the people who support Trump are like, yeah, we got to make America, safe for white people. But the war to save the world for whitey has been over for, I don't know, freaking centuries. Only 1.4 billion people out of 8 billion are white people in the world. That's less than 20%. So if we want to attract, foreigners to come to the U.S. to build their industries, we got to cut it out with the xenophobia.
Well, technically we're Caucasians, but my point is we need to do it based upon skills and knowledge and the ability to contribute. If you look at CEOs for Fortune 500 companies, in particular in the technology sector, you'd be shocked with how high the percentage is of immigrants, in particular from India. India is disproportionately represented among CEOs. And so we need top people, and we need to dramatically reform our immigration laws to be able to focus more on macroeconomic needs, skills, knowledge, and performance, and to differentiate between temporary work permits, permanent green cards, and pathways to citizenship. There's a way to deal with this that's intelligent. Unfortunately, Congress is a lag indicator, and is probably more divided now than about it's ever been.
So I'm going to be a little facetious, but I got to say that American women are not falling for American men's bullshit. So we need to attract women from the rest of the world who might not find us as creepy as American women do.
Well, I've been fortunate. I've been married to my wife for 53 years. We got married in college, so at least it worked in my case. But John, you got your hand up, buddy.
Yeah, I like to hear Nick's views on this because I don't think he would agree with, I'm guessing, I'm speculating, with what you just said, David.
So that's about what? What am I supposed to disagree with?
No, immigration in general.
Oh, immigration. Well, the thing is, Trump's policy on immigration.
The reason why I asked is that because you said, a couple of days ago that, you guys should send all the Venezuelans to Canada. I would love them. And so I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, that thing is, that's something we really discuss more on World Edition than we do here, more economics here, which brings me to my next topic, which is this: the $892 billion in interest, David. Okay.
You didn't answer my. Sorry.
What?
You didn't answer my question.
I'm not going to answer your question because it belongs on a different show. It's immigration is not what we're discussing. We're discussing economics here, and we're going to discuss the $892 billion in interest that the United States has. David, last I saw, the U.S. Treasury 5% for 30 years, and then 4 and change if it's like a 10-year Treasury. What are we going to do about this? Because this is just money out the door to pay interest on debts that have been accumulated over decades because of basically mismanagement by our government. What are your thoughts on this horrendous mismanagement?
Unfortunately, since 2003, our Congress, without a check and balance from the president via the veto pen, has been addicted to spending, deficits, and debt. It's one thing to run deficits and accumulate debt when you have a war, a serious recession, a national emergency. But unfortunately, we've been running increasingly large deficits without a recession, without a declared war, which the last time we did that was World War II. And even in times where we don't have a major national emergency. If you look at spending, for example, spending is about $7 trillion a year. That's up from $4.5 trillion in 2019. We really, put the foot on the pedal for spending during COVID, and we haven't taken the foot off the pedal very much, even though the fact that COVID is over. Our fastest growing expense is interest. It now exceeds the Defense Department budget. And what do you get for interest? Nothing. And if you look at the composition of our budget, about 3/4 of the budget now is so-called mandatory spending, where we've written a blank check. When you add the tax preferences, deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions, which really represent backdoor spending or foregone revenue, the Congress controls less than 15%, 1/5 of annual expenditures. How can you call that a budget? So the result is that we're going to have a constitutional amendment that limits how much debt as a percentage of the economy that we can take on, which is a pro-growth approach, but says you got to solve the numerator problem. Doesn't tell Congress how to solve it, how much of it is revenues, how much of it is spending reductions, but it says you got to solve it, and there are consequences if you don't. And then we're going to have a commission, which I've talked about, to try to engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough, solicit input, set the table for an up or down vote in Congress, dealing with spending, dealing with revenues, and other matters, in order to give us a jump start on reducing debt to GDP over time.
So the only country in the world that doesn't have national debt is New Zealand. The U.S. is 42nd in the world in debt as a percentage of GDP. And ahead of us are all sorts of fancy countries, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway. How are we in such dire straits? And how can these little countries that have a higher ratio of debt to GDP get away with it?
Well, I'm not sure how you're doing the ranking. Is it 42, one being the best and 42 being worse?
One being like the largest ratio of debt to GDP, one being the worst. So we're 42nd worst out of 200 countries.
Depends on how you analyze it. In 2010, I think it was, I worked with Stanford's master's program and had a team of master's students from around the world, including China, including Eastern Europe and United States, et cetera. And we came up with something called a Sovereign Fiscal Responsibility Index, SFRI, which analyzed debt to GDP today, projected forward, and also what type of fiscal controls the different countries had. At that point in time, Australia and New Zealand were ranked 1 and 2, and the United States was ranked number 28. We could update the numbers. I haven't updated the numbers, but the bottom line is that when, depending upon what your metric is and what type of controls you have, the bottom line is we're below average and we're getting worse.
Hey, David, I've got a quick question for you. It's actually based on one of our other shows, and actually John.
Only 1 second, Mark. Let me clarify. When I say below average, meaning that's not good.
Yeah.
I don't mean below average on debt to GDP, because we're above average on debt to GDP. Sorry, Mark.
No problem. And that's a good clarification and everything. We have a show that airs here, and actually they did a rerun on yesterday, but it's every Sunday. It's called Que Pasa Mujer, and it's 3 Latin women. And one of the things that they always brag about and talk about regularly is the fact that right now the Latin population in the U.S. is roughly 1 in 5 Americans, and they make 3.7 trillion in gross domestic product. So that's something that they bring up on their show regularly. But they are key contributors to the economic prosperity of the nation as a whole. But there's large disparities in wealth that have long existed, and I know that that's been not just in the Latin population, but in the African American population as well. And as our society grows increasingly complex, we face significant challenges, but we're also presented with momentous opportunities, as what the Aspen Institute said. And they said Latinos could generate an additional 2.3 trillion if economic parity were achieved. And that's what I was going to ask you: is economic parity even possible, and should we be striving for economic parity?
Well, first, 3.7 trillion is out of 28 trillion.
Right.
Okay. Secondly, Latinos, Hispanics, you go by different names, now represent the second largest segment of our population after Caucasians. Okay. They've passed African Americans, blacks. Part of the issue is that, what are the skills and knowledge of the populations? Okay. My view is that we need to maximize opportunity, and we need to capitalize on all segments of our population. And my experience has been that most of the Hispanics that I know are very family oriented and very hardworking. Okay. I would say that you probably have a disproportionate percentage of illegal immigrants that are Hispanic. Okay. I would come back and say we need to engage in comprehensive immigration reform, because in many cases we need them in order to be able to support segments of our economy that otherwise other people won't do. And so, I believe in equality of opportunity and taking affirmative actions to try to achieve equality of opportunity, but I don't think we'll ever have equal results, nor do I think the government can mandate equal results.
John, you have some thoughts around that?
I'll give you an example, Mark. When I ran GAO, we actually were probably 20 years ahead of where the government is on a lot of different things. And one of the areas that we were 20 years ahead was we used to have an office called the Office of Civil Rights. Mm-hmm. And I changed it to the Office of Opportunity and Inclusiveness. Mm-hmm. And we took a number of steps to try to change our recruiting, our training, our promotion, a number of other efforts in order to maximize diversity, okay, consistent with skills, knowledge, and ability, all right, and we with very positive results. But again, it was maximizing opportunity, because we can never guarantee equal result. That's impossible.
Yeah, John.
Yeah. So obviously, despite Nick saying that he doesn't want to talk about immigration, obviously we're talking about it, and immigration policy is intertwined with economics.
Yeah.
In my chat, I gave a whole bunch of points as to why, obvious points.
Well, let me come back a little bit higher than immigration policy. One of the things that we don't have as a country, meaning the United States, we don't have a strategic framework about what are we trying to accomplish, how do we measure success, how are we doing, how do we compare to others. That's something else I'm working on right now to try to make a reality. But a subset of that is human capital strategy. Human capital strategy is how we're going to maximize the potential of our most valuable asset, which is our people. All right. And
how do you convince people?
Pardon me, I'm not done. But to do that, it's multidimensional. You have to consider education policy. You have to consider immigration policy. You have to consider, training and retraining. You have to consider a number of different dimensions in order to be able to get that done. And we haven't done that. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Sorry for interrupting. So how do you convince people to do just that?
Well, it's interesting because one of the Congress can't do it because the Congress is a committee and nobody's in charge of the committee. and it can't even do the one express and enumerated responsibility it has under the Constitution each year on time, and that is to pass all the appropriations bills. In theory, who ought to be able to do it is the Office of Management and Budget, who works for the president. But in reality, they haven't done it. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm working with some prominent people in the private sector, and we're going to try to take a shot at doing a framework for this based on the Constitution, based upon authorizing legislation as compared to what the government is doing right now, focusing on outcome-based indicators that we ought to be making sure that all of our activities, that spending guarantees, tax preferences, regulatory enforcement policy are geared towards trying to achieve those objectives. We're going to take a shot at see if we can get philanthropy to fund the first phase of that effort, and I'm hoping that that will come to reality later this year.
Another question: in the past, have you had more success dealing with a Democratic administration versus Republican administrations in the past, or are they kind of equal?
No. Well, let's talk from a fiscal standpoint. Okay, the Democrats want to spend more money, and the Republicans want to reduce taxes. And all too frequently, when you get a compromise, John, they do both, which hemorrhages the bottom line. Okay, in our country, only one person is elected by all the voters, and that's the president. And that means the president has a disproportionate opportunity and obligation to lead. And the last president who led on fiscal issues, tax and spending, was Bill Clinton. And the last one that did before that was George Herbert Walker Bush. Clinton was a Democrat. George Herbert Walker Bush was a Republican. It really has to do with the individual rather than the party.
Thank you.
So a few minutes ago, you were talking about being part of a team that was analyzing the economic health of the U.S. So there's a tool from the Heritage Foundation that I find very useful. Now, the Heritage Foundation, I don't agree with them politically at all. They're kind of behind Trump's agenda, but they do an annual list called the Index of Economic Freedom, which measures each country in the world according to 12 indices. And yeah, it's a little politically loaded, but it's still useful to see how we compare to other countries, to see how we compare to past years. And, I don't know where else to go to find a list like this.
What are we ranked?
26th in the world in economic liberty. Let's see, right behind Portugal, right ahead of Qatar, ahead of Japan. Only 3 countries does the Heritage Foundation rank as economically free, given their highest rating. That's Singapore, Switzerland, and Ireland. We're in the second tier of countries.
Well, Rick, one of the things that I find is most Americans have no idea how we rank on a whole range of measures. And they assume that since we're the leading superpower on earth from an economic, diplomatic, military, cultural perspective, I said leading, didn't say only, okay, that we must medal, meaning top 3, in virtually everything. And in reality, that is not true. In fact, as you just pointed out, we're not even top 20 with regard to this metric. We're not top 20 with regard to fiscal issues. We're not top 20 with regard to K through 12 education. We're not top 20 with regard to healthcare outcomes. And so all the more reason why I think we need to do what I advocated for. We need to have a strategic framework. What are we trying to accomplish? How do we measure success in outcome-based terms? How are we doing compared to plan? Are we getting better or worse? And how do we compare to others? By the way, you mentioned Switzerland. I use Switzerland, Germany, and Sweden as examples of countries that had fiscal challenges and ended up adopting constitutional debt to GDP limits to get them back under control. If they can do it, we can do it. We just need to do it sooner rather than later.
Hey, David, along those same lines, one of those really surprised me and everything like that when Rick just gave you that list, because I know a little bit about history, being a journalism major with a poli-sci background and everything like that in terms of the minor when I was in school way back when. And that is Ireland, because Ireland had some very rich history in terms of being a famine populated country. And it's definitely even had some wars with the UK and other things that are still out there. I know that the IRA, the Ireland radicals and everything are still involved in a lot of things. So Ireland actually surprised me that they would be so strong economically. So I was wondering if that surprised you as well, and if you know anything about what has got Ireland on the right track, for lack of a better term.
Well, Ireland has very low tax rates for corporations and less regulation than we have. I'm not saying that's the only reason by any means, but they have taken a very aggressive stance to try to be able to attract business. And if you attract business, you create more job opportunities. You create more job opportunities. You create more economic growth, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, I have another question for you, David. When I'm going through this one big, beautiful bill, they actually increased defense spending to $1 trillion. Do you think that that's necessary? Because we already spend more than any other country, a bunch of countries combined. And if there was ever an opportunity to balance the budget, you could actually decrease defense spending. But apparently there's no greater appetite than eating our dollars into the defense budget that I'm not sure if we're getting our value. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, you are correct that if you look in nominal dollars, okay, that we spend as much on defense as about the next 10 nations combined, okay? But that is very misleading because the cost of an all-volunteer force and the cost of the weapon systems that we have are a lot greater than a lot of our competitors and comparators. For example, China has mandatory military service. China, a lot of their production of weapons and material, et cetera, are done by state-owned enterprises at a fraction of the cost of what we end up paying for weapon systems. If you look at nominal GDP, we're number one in the world in nominal GDP. But if you look at purchasing power parity GDP, China's ahead of us. Okay. Truth is, we need a transformation within our Defense Department as well. We need to relook at our force structure, our footprint, our weapon systems, and to make sure that they're rationalized for current and likely future threats rather than past ones. We need to dramatically reduce the amount of overhead that we have in the Defense Department. It's become a bloated bureaucracy. We need to relook at our compensation systems. Our philosophy in compensation in the military is exactly the opposite of the private sector. The most expensive is deferred benefits. The second most expensive is current benefits. The least expensive is cash compensation. That's exactly the opposite of what it is in the private sector. And so, ironically, I've been a huge advocate for government transformation in general and defense, including defense transformation. You now have an administration that theoretically is for that, at least rhetoric-wise, and yet they eliminated the Defense Business Board. Hopefully, they're going to end up reconstituting it before too long, because maybe we can actually start taking some steps along the lines of what I'm talking about. But how you do it matters. If you look at DOGE, DOGE hasn't gone about it the right way. And it's been very, very disruptive, and it really hasn't resulted in saving very much money because only Congress can cut spending.
Yeah, well, we've been joined by Adam Lamparero at Lawyers Den, and maybe he can give us a little idea of what his thoughts are on this one big, beautiful bill.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me on. I think that the big, beautiful bill has some good things and some not so good things. I think it's kind of a mixed bag. Uh, I think it does a good thing in extending the Trump tax cuts, which lowers the rates for everybody. It does disproportionately benefit the wealthy, but I think for good reason. It expands tax breaks for auto loans, health savings accounts, and tips. It does raise the child tax credit, provides border security funding. So I think that there are some very good things. I don't think it's going to solve everything. I think a lot more has to be done, but I tend to think it's not that bad. What I would say is this: if we want to cut spending, I'm a huge believer in the line item veto, and I think the Supreme Court was wrong in Clinton versus New York when they, by a 6-3 vote, held it to be unconstitutional under the presentment clause. So I would look into ways for Congress and the president to work to return the line item veto in a way that would survive constitutional muster. Those are generally thoughts. As far as something you said about education before, our educational system is broken because it's really become a factory of indoctrination rather than developing critical thinking, reading, research, and marketable skills. 40% of fourth graders can't even read proficiently. So we've got problems to solve. I think Trump is the right man at the right time. I say that with cautious optimism, though.
So I noticed that Golden Dome popped up in the subheads here, which will likely be, if we push forward on it, 25 billion a year, but $500 billion overall, even though the physics is very challenging and it didn't work in the 80s, and I'm not sure physics has gotten any easier. So I'm not a super big fan of Golden Dome. I am a fan of looking at all possible avenues to reduce the risk of nuclear war, which might include like a granite dome, where we have dug out a couple secret underground cities. One is for government personnel. In the case of a nuclear war, they get whisked away to this secret underground city. We have another one where NORAD is in Colorado, and there's a show called Paradise it's a fictional show that takes place in NORAD town after a nuclear war. Should we spend $500 billion on digging out more underground cities? Should we make a deal with Russia where, they're broke? So let's say, hey, we'll give you $200 million for every nuclear weapon you take off the table. I don't know. There are a lot of different ways to go about it. So, before we commit to Golden Dome, we should look at all possible solutions.
David, what are your thoughts on the bill?
Well, Adam, as I said before, I think there are positives and negatives in the bill. Okay, but the bottom line is it is fiscally irresponsible. It ends up significantly increasing our deficits and projected debt burdens over time when we need to be doing exactly the opposite. And so I covered more a little bit earlier, but I think it's a mixed bag. Okay. I don't think it'll pass in its present form. There's going to have to be adjustments in the Senate, and then we got to see whether they can reconcile the differences between the House and the Senate. I think what we have to do is, I don't want to get in the way of a moving train. The fact is something's going to pass. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but something is going to pass. But what I want to do is focus on what do we need to do next, because this actually makes our long-range challenge worse. It's typical for politicians. Short-term gain, increased risk of long-term pain. All right? I mean, that's basically what it is. And so what I'm saying is, if this thing's going to pass, or something along these lines, if it's going to pass, then what do we need to do in order to try to be able to put our finances in order? And we got to do two things. We need to have that statutory commission that I've talked about. All right? And we need to have a constitutional amendment. And I intentionally called it a fiscal responsibility amendment because it's not balanced budget. It focuses on debt to GDP. And by the way, when you talk about fiscal responsibility amendment, you can add other things to it, like line item veto, like no budget, no pay, meaning if Congress doesn't get its but all the appropriation bills done on time by the beginning of the fiscal year, they don't get paid. They've got to stay in session. and they don't get retroactive pay. Believe it or not, California, which is a leader and laggard in many things, passed something similar to that, and they've been on time ever since. And the last time Congress was on time with regard to this was 1997.
So, what was Bill Clinton able to do with Congress to balance the budget that we can't now?
Well, you have to understand that there were several things, and some of which are in this bill. Okay, I mean, he had pro-growth policies. We had very good economic growth. There's no question about it. He also had deregulation. He did a lot of deregulation. He also had work requirements for people that were on welfare. He also worked on a bipartisan basis with Newt Gingrich to try to get things done, right? And so, although he did, Adam, he was benefited by the fact that it was the .com boom.
Yeah.
There was a lot of money that was made in stock options and equities. And so there was a significant surge in revenues that came with that. My youngest brother worked for a .com that became a .bomb. So, what goes up can go down, that's
Yeah, we've been joined by Shaquille Latmer, who's actually in Fiji right now. See if you have any comments about this one big, beautiful bill. It passed through the House, Shaq, and then it's going into the Senate. Any thoughts do you have?
Yeah, I'll just say I certainly hope that our good friend David M. Walker from Virginia was not suggesting that Gavin Newsom would be a great pick for the next president of the United States, given his compliment to California. Look, I share some of the concerns that he's raised. I think the question is how much growth the United States would potentially get, and also I think Donald Trump might be able to get away with bullying Republicans in the House, but perhaps he's not quite as able to do that in the Senate. So I think that there'll be some changes made in the Senate, but all up, I have some concerns, but I'm not too bothered actually. I think that whatever changes are made to the United States, good or bad, can then be fixed. I think you've got to go through some pain, and this may move the United States into a better direction for future decades.
Yep. And with that, we're going to have to end because we're at the hour. We want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and our panelists in the United States and also around the world. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. Take care until then. Bye-bye.
Thank you.